Hi, and welcome. Thank you so much for attending the virtual tour today. My name is Duan Ace. I am a senior solutions architect with WhereScape. And we're going to take probably about the next 20 to 25 minutes at a high level talking about SQL Server large scale migrations, right? We're going to get into what the different products that WhereScape offers and how it can help companies move data at large scale, either from a SQL Server to something else or from something else into a SQL Server. So I'm excited to go on this journey with you, and let's go ahead and get started. To just give a quick background on who I am and my qualifications. Everything that I'm saying today hopefully has some credit to it. Again, my name is Duan Ace. I've been in the data and software industry for over 10 years now. Worked on projects such as embedded development, built data warehousing, done a lot of embedded development, owned and operated my own consultancy where I've built data warehouse platforms and foundations for many clients. Loved the tool so much loved WhereScape's tool so much that I decided to come on board. So, just wanted to make a quick note about data, right? Something that I think cannot be expressed enough in today's world, right? Data is valuable. Data was valuable 5 years ago, even 10 years ago. But as time goes on, data is becoming more and more a dependency on companies and organizations today to drive their business forward. And the amount of data is just exponentially getting larger and larger and larger. We're collecting so much more data. There is just an absolute there's a lot of data out there, and companies and organizations utilize all that. So the time of data engineering and automation is going to change the shape of the future of how companies organize, manage their data. And that's where tools like WhereScape can come in and help developers with that process. I want to quickly just talk about when it comes to data, and especially how it's going to be relating to migrations, right? Migrations, when companies or organizations want to move from one platform to the next or switch technologies, 8 out of 10 times, the biggest reasons for that is just cost savings, right? It's all revolved around from a cost savings perspective. But then a lot of organizations hit a wall, right? It's expensive to move, right? Maybe long term, the ROI, there's a long-term ROI where it'll eventually pay off, but the initial phases is expensive, right? And also it is complex, right? You've built an entire foundation. So how does tools like WhereScape help with that, right? So when it comes to data, your organization may already have a data foundation. But one of the challenges of data is it's complex, right? Data is complex. It comes in all shapes and all sizes. And with that complexity, how you implement your business rules, your hard rules, your soft rules, may or may not translate as easily from one system to the next, right? And because of that, it requires some intervention by developers to accomplish that. And when folks deal with the complexity of the data on a manual basis, there is a high risk of error, right? We're human. We all make mistakes. And anyways, so the complexity behind it. The next challenge when it comes to data, previously when I was saying that data is just very, very valuable, but it's also the volume of work and the volume of data. The bigger your foundation, the more processes and protocols you have in place, and especially if you have end users that are relying on the data sets, the dashboards that are presented and built from the data warehouse, that complicates the situation even a little bit further. So obviously, if you have petabytes of data, moving it from one system to the next is not an easy task. So that's a second challenge when it comes to just having data. And then finally, really the purpose of today's virtual tour is the building and the migration, as explained with everything that I just said a few minutes ago. Building and migrating is a lot of work, and you need the skills on hand to be able to build that new foundation to help with the migration process. And I'm excited to share about WhereScape itself. So, just a couple of quick things, right? WhereScape, let's talk about what WhereScape products and what we have and what we offer. We have two products. We have WhereScape 3D and WhereScape Red. They're two very, very different products. They have very different responsibilities, but they complement each other. When it comes to WhereScape 3D, 3D is our modeling tool where we have a data, it specializes in three pillars, right, which is discovery, profiling, and then the actual modeling aspect of it. It's a very low footprint. It just uses metadata to be able to connect to sources, to discover the relationships that they have. And then it goes through we undergo through a process called profiling where we send a bunch of metrical queries against said sources to understand the data about the data, right? Get insight. And then finally, we have the last piece in the component, which is the modeling aspect, right? Where it is a drag and drop, load to no code approach of creating whatever architecture makes sense for your business. We support all of the major architecture, your Kimball, your Inmon, your Data Vault, and any hybrid between them all, as the real world is a lot more complex than just 100% straight architecture of some kind. And so that's 3D. And on the other hand, we have WhereScape Red. Red is our builder tool. That is the thing that manages. It's an abstraction layer. Well, I like to always say that WhereScape Red is an extraction layer that lives on top of a data warehouse, and it manages the life cycle of the entities within the data warehouse itself. And with that, it manages how tables get processed, how it loads, how it moves data from one object to the next or one table to the next. And so again, that's why we call Red our builder tool, is it physically does the things on the data warehouse. And all of this is automation, right? Because building a warehouse, obviously you can do it by hand. It's very error prone, it's time consuming, and you need the skills on hand to be able to do that no matter what technology you go forward with. But the great thing about data warehouse design and even migrations and moving data from one to the next, it's fairly pattern based. And because it's pattern based, we're able to abstract that pattern base. That patterns essentially extracted into a set of repeatable templates where we dynamically generate the code underneath the hood to be able to do whatever it is that we need to do. So when it comes to data automation, that is what we mean by data automation, right? Is abstracting and removing that overhead and allowing developers to just focus on actually building a warehouse appropriately, all right, or migrating your data from point A to point B, and you deal with the operational challenges, not the coding challenges, right? Not to say that it's going to get rid of it completely, but it helps along the way, and it just allows your developers to be extremely efficient, more efficient and faster at moving. So who benefits from data automation? Everyone, right? Data admins, that's responsible for deploying and testing, problem solving. BI database developers, right? Because our tools are metadata driven, we collect so much information that gives you amazing documentation. So your end users can understand how the data is all tied together. You have our data architects, executives. It really just benefits everyone because you're able to get a product out to market faster. You're able to prove that your data is correct, whether it is a source issue or whether it is a downstream issue. You're able to track, and we have features such as data lineage and just a lot of things that helps on the governance side, the auditability side, as well as the development side. So data automation truly serves everyone. And the last thing I want to say before I get kind of transition into showing a little bit of a demo of what I mean, how we can use our tools to help with large-scale migrations, is that both of our platforms is platform agnostic. It doesn't matter what you're connecting to. We support all of the major platforms out there, from the cloud bases all the way to the on-prem traditional. I always like to make this comical joke to say I believe the only thing that we do not support out of the box is any sort of mainframes that was around in the 70s and 80s. But with that said, our tools are actually so configurable and customizable that I am highly confident that we can even make that work with some intervention. So yeah, with that said, let's transition a little bit to the demo, and I can show you guys how the tool itself can help with large-scale migrations from a SQL Server to something else, or vice versa. Great, now we can move on to our two products, 3D and Red. And I'd like to take a little bit of a time to explain what these tools are and definitely what they are not, and especially how it relates to large-scale SQL migrations. So when it comes to both 3D and Red, the only two products that we offer for data automation, they're two very, very different tools. They have two very different responsibilities, but used together, they absolutely complement each other. So let's start with 3D, and 3D is what I have here on the screen being shared. So 3D is what we consider our modeling tool. Now, it excels in three pillars, where two of said pillars is going to help tremendously. It has helped customers and prospects in the past when it comes to migration. And the modeling aspect, there are some few use cases, and I'll get into how that helps and aids teams. So when it comes to 3D, the three pillars of its and what it's really good at is discovery, profile, and obviously the modeling component of it. So let's start with discovery. What is it? Discovering is connecting to something. It needs to be a source of something. It could be, obviously in our context here, it's going to be our legacy data warehouse, right? Or our SQL Server that we're coming from. And it goes into that source and tries to grab as much information as it possibly can to understand the relationship between everything. Obviously, depending on whatever you're connecting to, is going to determine how much metadata is automatically scraped. Luckily, in our instance, in this context of what we're talking about, if we connect to a SQL Server, because it's your traditional RDBMS, it's going to have so many goodies for us to be able to understand, right? It's going to have business keys, it's going to have indexes, foreign keys, and it uses all of, obviously data types and, pretty much all the information needed in order to recreate that relationship on our side. And you'll see it. We are able to generate ERDs. We're able to click on individual attributes and entities and be able to understand exactly what makes that thing tick. So that's the discovery portion. Typically, right after discovery, we do what's called profiling. And profiling is we send a mass amounts, obviously all very configurable, but you can send mass amounts of queries to that source to understand the data about, you pretty much get data about the data, right? So truly your metadata. And it sends a series of metrical queries and it tries to understand all sorts of stuff, right? And you have the ability to add your own queries if there is a statistical component that we don't have straight out of the box. You can add your own. But it gives us information such as null percentage counts, average character counts, just a lot of different things. And I'll show you here what that looks like. And then finally, we have the modeling aspect to it. Now, in the context of SQL Server migrations, the modeling can have, there is a specific use case of how that can be implemented and how it can aid teams doing migrations. Now, but before I get to that, I want to take a step back to maybe just share some of my personal anecdote or my professional anecdotal experiences with working with customers and people building data warehouses. You get normally two buckets of enterprises and organizations that tackles migrations. On one hand, which is fairly common, is we're all on this platform. It has now gotten ridiculously expensive or it's super unoptimized. Whatever their business reason was to shift it to something else, it has no matter what that decision, why that decision took place. Point is there may be years and years and years of developmental effort on the previous system, not just the end results, not just the reporting layer, but it has all the intermediate tables. It has all the stored procedures or functions or whatever. It has everything baked into it. And typically migration projects like to lift and shift everything that's in there into the new target database. Now, if that is your bucket, the modeling aspect probably won't serve you any value. Just because the modeling is initially designed for building and extending an existing data warehouse or a brand new one, however you want to do it. And but if you're in the other bucket, which I have seen before, not as common as the first one, but the second bucket is organizations that are also, they want to migrate, but instead of migrating everything, they just want to migrate the end result. So when I keep saying end result, I mean, wherever you pull in data from, you munge the data, you do whatever you need it to do, and then it lands somewhere, whether for long-term storage, reporting, whatever the case may be. And those types of customers and clients want to just migrate all that over, and they want to abandon the logic and the processes that it came from because maybe it got unmanageable, unruly, maybe it looks like a cobweb, maybe it's cheaper to just rebuild it than it is to maintain it, whatever the case may be. But they just want to remove the end part. And if you just do that, that gives you the freedom to rebuild the inner workings, right? All you need to know, at the end of the day, how Data warehousing works, and this also translates over to software engineering, is there's an input and there's an output, and then you have this magical black box. And for the most part, people do not care what happens inside of this black box as long as the output matches what they expect. So if that is you and you want to just migrate the output, you know what the input is, which is your sources and wherever your data is initially coming from, but now you have the flexibility to rewrite the black box internally. And if that is you and part of that bucket itself, then the modeling aspect of 3D can really, really come into play. And just to kind of I'll get to that. Let me just show you from everything that I've talked about from discovery, profiling, and modeling, and what that actually physically looks like in our product. So if we look at, so right here I have a connection. It's called the traders connection. It points back to a Microsoft SQL Server. Just in the context of today, the role playing, we're going to do a little bit of a role play. My traders connection represents my old SQL Server data warehouse that I am migrating from. And so why create a connection, and then from that I create a source model. Source model is just another word for a subset of that connection, right? You're looking at a subset of entities. Obviously, if you've inherited a foundation or you have a foundation today that can span thousands and thousands of tables with all sorts of complex logics and relationships and dependencies, you obviously don't want to bring all that stuff in. It may just be an absolute clutter to look at, and just you ideally just don't want to do that. So sources allows you to create a subset. And that subset is defined by you. It could be lines of business units. It could be data marks. It could be even smaller sections, whatever the case may be. And that was be my approach too. It's a lot easier to manage that way. But once you create that source, you pretty much do the data discovery and profiling right off the bat. And what that ends up looking like at the end when you go through these processes. And by the way, these processes are all low to no code approaches. In fact, it's practically no code. It brings up a wizard, not the magical wizard, but the GUI type of wizard that looks something like this. And you just go click, 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 set your options, configurations, and then it does what it needs to do behind the scenes. And if once the discovery process is done, obviously this is a demo data set, so everything is perfect, everything is outlined for you and whatnot. But the more metadata the source has, the better this tool has at doing its job automatically. And again, I'm not going to, this is kind of getting super granular, but if those relationships don't exist, we give you options to try to bulk identify what those relationships would look like based off of criteria, or we give you the ability to manually make those connections and relationships through a drag and drop interface. But as you can see from this, we've already gleaned the relationships, the foreign keys, the business keys, any sort of indexes that might be present in this data set. And it just gives you a nice overall view, visual view to your data warehouse and a subset of it. So this is very, very popular amongst folks who utilize this tool, especially if they've, again, inherited a behemoth of a foundation, or they just work in a foundation that is extremely complex. And maybe not everyone truly understands how everything is related and interconnected, et cetera, et cetera. A tool like this is definitely helpful because it visualizes what's going on behind the scenes. And on top of that, the profiling, again, same concept, same process, click, 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 off we go. And when we finish with the profiling exercise, we're able to actually see that information in a couple of different ways. One is our internal analytical tool that just gives us a very high level overview of what kind of went on. So I can choose any of my entities here. I'm going to click on region. It's always, or actually not region, what is it? Orders. And with orders, these are all of the metrics, the statistics that was ran against it, right? So you have null percentage counts, numeric ranges, populated. So this is also good for data that you may not understand what is in it. Why is it in, like, what does this data even mean? So in this particular case, null percentage, ship region has a little over 60%. Hopefully that's not a business key downstream anywhere. That'll cause all sorts of problems. The other way that we can view the profiling results is through a table format. So it gives you a nice little CSV output, which you then have the ability to export as a CSV. Then you can do whatever you need to do with it. Import it to analytical tools, store it as metadata, whatever the case is, you have that capability. So we don't vendor lock you down. We give you ways to export this information to be ingested in something else or used in a different manner. So that's the data and profiling aspect of it. Now, I wanted to very briefly touch on a subject before I move over to red, and that's going to be if you were in the latter bucket, or sorry, the latter bucket, which is just moving the end in mind, like moving the final results into your data warehouse, and you are responsible for recreating the guts. Then that's where the modeling aspect can really come into play. Because you can essentially replicate what you currently have in your data warehouse as a one-to-one, create a model out of it, whether that looks like your whether that looks like your star schema or your data vault or Inmon or whatever the case may be. It represented in 3D, and then 3D can take all that information and fill in the guts for you. So it creates the loading tables, it creates all the staging tables and whatever is needed in order to get from your source to that final output. And I know all this is easier said than done. Every instance and project has its own hurdles and challenges to overcome, but that's ideally the generic 100,000 foot view of the process and the workflow. Okay, so enough of 3D. Just due to the time constraints with the virtual tour, I do want to move over to red and kind of really show off that tool. So just like 3D is our modeling tool, and by the way, if I haven't mentioned this before, 3D is an extremely low footprint. It doesn't do any data crunching. It does absolutely nothing besides just tapping into your sources, grabbing the metadata, and then we just play around, quote unquote, play around with that metadata to get to where you want to be. Red, on the other hand, is what we call our builder tool. This is the actual building agent that lives on top of your data warehouse. And the best way I like to always describe what WhereScape Red is, I like to think of it as an abstraction layer that sits on top of your data warehouse, and it manages the entities, it manages the life cycle of those entities and how those entities are processed and interacted with. So it physically does the work. It creates the tables, it generates the underlying logic to move data or load data or do your historical loads, delta loads, full loads, whatever the case may be, whatever makes sense for you. Red has that capability out of the box, low to no code approach of doing it. But with both of our tools, we also give you that ability to peek underneath the hood to see how the sausage is made. So if you are a power user, feel free. You can go check it out, see how this stuff is done, and make your own alterations. If there is a neat little quirk that isn't taken care of by our out-of-the-box solution. So we never put you in a box. Anyway, so with that said, with Red, right, we can bring it. It's designed to be able to quickly bring in data and build out your architecture. So in terms of SQL migration, how that would look like from a manual perspective is pretty simple. Just like 3D, I have a series of connection objects that I can connect to. Here's that traders that I had earlier. I'm going to come in and actually browse it here. And when I browse it here on the right-hand side, I can see all of my entities that I want. In fact, I don't like the views. It just sort of clutters up my screen. So I'm going to filter those out so I can just see my tables themselves. Once I have my tables, I've created this small little project here called Migration Phase 1. Ideally, migrations are never a one fell swoop project. They are normally piecemealed, as they should be, to test and do everything you need to do and then move it over. So anyways, in different phases. So this first phase, I'm just going to bring over a series of tables. To literally bring it over, I can click on any one of these tables, drag and drop it over, give it a name, called Migrate in this case, choose where I want to throw it into in my Snowflake data warehouse. That's the instance of what I have here today is Snowflake. And I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. Everything is a wizard based, right? GUI wizard based. Click on the magic create and load button, and what it will do in the back end is then create the table itself, load the data, stage the data, and push it out to Snowflake itself. And and there's really not a lot of data in here. There's only 3 records. But anyway, so from that, in Red's world, loading tables are meant to be temporary. So ideally from here, you throw it into a data store. This is a staging area, operational data store, anything that is meant for long-term usage. And throughout the exact same process in motion, I would connect to my data warehouse, find it here, drag and drop it in the data store, and go about my merry way. One last final note before we kind of wrap up this virtual tour today, and this is a very, very common question, especially folks who are coming from a SQL Server environment, and that's going to be that most of the time those organizations are already using SSIS, right? SSIS and Microsoft SQL typically go hand in hand. And the common question we always get is, well, I've already spent years developing on SSIS. Can we translate that over to Red? And the answer is a little complicated. And it's not because it's a WhereScape thing. If you move from one technology to a different technology, there is no magic pill. There is no silver bullet, one push button to make that transition seamless. It just does not exist. It's unrealistic. But with that said, there are different strategies that you can incorporate depending on where you're coming from and where you're going. That is obviously unique depending on where you're coming from and where you are going to. In the case of SSIS to Red, like I said, the most common questions we get is, we already have all of this logic. Can I use it in this environment? The answer is yes, you can. There's trade-offs. And I typically always, I like to always present these solutions that it comes into a two-part solution. The first part is your small short-term wins, and that's coupled with your long-term plan. And what do I mean by that? So let's just take an example. If you have an SSIS workflow, and in one of those workflows, it calls a stored procedure. And inside that stored procedure is this massive thousands of lines SQL statement code that has a bunch of CTEs and subqueries and whatever it needs to do to populate said table. Now, just as Red dynamically generates the logic underneath the hood to do what it needs to do, you can override that functionality and say, like, I don't want you to do that, but instead I'm going to give you the logic itself, and I'm going to attach it to this object. So every time I process it, it's going to execute whatever logic was attached to it from the beginning. So to show you that in practice, I've actually created a little procedure here, and this relates to my Migrate customers data store that I've created. Now, there's nothing in here, but this was purely just for demo or just for conversation and for the virtual tour. But you can go into your stored procedure on SSIS, copy and paste that entire code, throw it in here, go to your object here for the customer table, and you can explicitly choose the update procedure for how this thing gets processed. And that is how you can easily do that short-term win of just moving everything over and having it work. Now, the cons to that approach is, because our tools are heavily metadata driven, the more metadata you have, the better the features of our tools can help you in your favor. Features such as automatic documentation, data lineage that helps with governance and auditability. And ideally, it is the best practice way of building it out, because if you stuff all of your logic in a multi-thousand SQL script, you lose the visibility of what's going on. So when you do get audited, or if you have an auditable request from someone, I've done it before. It is a major pain to be able to siphon through that extremely large, long file to try to understand what is actually going on. And that's not even to mention bugs and business changes and whatnot. So what customers do is, after they just have it working, to try to implement some of that metadata capabilities, once again, we transition it over to the long-term plan, which is start rebuilding, refactoring all of that logic into a way that Red can utilize it to provide those additional features, those visibility into your data. And how you do that is actually very simple, because I've done this many times before. But you can have even 1,000-page or 1,000-line SQL script, and like I said, most of the time those scripts are a combination of a bunch of CTEs, maybe some subqueries, update, insert statements, and whatnot. And you can rebuild that entire logic in Red, where every CTE becomes either a view or a staging table, or you can rebuild the workflow of what that script is doing into its own individual entities within Red, which is reflecting your warehouse. And the moment you do that, now you have really great visibility of where your data is coming from and the transformations and processes that it was involved in to get to the end product. And to show you just kind of what that looks like, I'm going to pick on another project here, because it's a little bit more interesting to look at. But I have here, for example, a table that I've created for a different project. And just to show you, like, based off the metadata, I can get this diagram. I can get this source diagram. I can view this many different ways. I can go onto this table itself. I can right-click on any sort of column, do a track back report, and it shows me in a very simplistic way of being able to trace that information back all the way back down to its source. So when it comes to migrations, it's really about as easy as just bringing it, because migrations on a higher level is fairly simplistic, and I say that with asterisks because there's always a disclaimers around that. but the concept of migration is fairly simplistic, right? You move things from one system to the next, and then you just have to change the underlying system specific language to be compatible with the target specific language, right? And anyways, and that's where Red comes in to the rescue for help. So we are kind of approaching the end of sort of the time limit with our virtual tour today. I wanted to thank everyone for sitting in and listening in on this. I hope it provided some value to you. Again, we are more here at WhereScape. We are more than happy to set up some very specific demos, or if you have questions regarding this virtual tour, or really any other questions that you would like us to touch base on, really kind of dig deep into, we're more than happy to do that. Please reach out to our support team, our sales team, for more information on that. You can also visit our website at wherescape.com, where we have a plethora amount of documentation and resources for you to understand and learn more about the tools we offer. And we have university courses, internal university courses that you can take to become proficient at the tool. We offer demos, we offer hands-on labs, we have white papers, use case studies. We just have pretty much we have a huge resource library full of things that may provide you benefit and see how we have used these tools in many, many different ways across a wide variety of industries. Again, we are more, especially Red, we are more than an ETL tool. I always like to just point that out. We are more than an ETL tool. We can do so much more than just simply ingesting, extracting, transforming, and loading, or ELT or ETL, whatever approach you're taking. So yes, so thank you very much again for your time, and hope you have a great rest of your day.